Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Duthier. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. If you see it happening behind you here, coming into one of our stations or affiliates, we're going to bring it to you right here. This is CBS News 24/7. Homecoming and a warm welcome for both of the Obamas as they make the case for Vice President Harris and make the case against Donald Trump during night 2 of the DNC. And it may feel like fall here in New York City, but across the South, it is still very much summer, and another excessive heat wave is on the way. Who needs to be on high alert as the dangerous temperatures roll through? Plus, more trouble for Boeing this morning. Why another fleet of planes is forced to be grounded. We're going to dig into all of those stories throughout the hour, but we begin with day 3 of the Democratic National Convention getting underway. Later today, Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz will formally accept his nomination. Former President Bill Clinton and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will also take to the stage to address the convention later tonight. Meanwhile, last night, second gentleman Doug Emhoff noted Thursday would be extra special for he and his wife. And former President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle urged Democrats to unite behind Vice President Kamala Harris to defeat Donald Trump in November.
For years, Donald Trump did everything in his power to try to make people fear us. See, his limited, narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of 2 hard-working, highly educated, successful people who happen to be black. Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
We do not need 4 more years of bluster and bumbling and chaos. We have seen that movie before, and we all know that the sequel is usually worse. America's ready for a new chapter. America's ready for a better story. We are ready for a President Kamala Harris.
All right. Joining me now is CBS News campaign reporter Shauna Mizell. She has been following the Harris campaign all throughout the campaign season. She was there last night at the convention. So, Shauna, we've seen the sound bites. If people were not able to stay up late to watch President Obama deliver the keynote address of the evening, some are actually saying Michelle Obama's speech was the keynote speech of the evening. But can you describe what the mood was like in the convention? Because we saw the speeches, but I want to get a sense of that electricity that felt that it was crackling throughout the course of the night, but especially when the Obamas took to the stage.
Vlad, I think you described it perfectly. Last night was day 2 of the DNC, and the feeling in the room was electric. There was a lot of excitement surrounding not only former President Barack Obama, but also former First Lady Michelle Obama, and she certainly stole the show. We heard from the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, who actually sought to really tie a personal side of Harris and present that to the audience and everyone watching and listening across the country. And as you mentioned, he actually said that him and Harris will celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary tomorrow. But it was Michelle Obama who really came out with some really pointed lines aimed at Donald Trump, even using some of his words against him, like that black jobs line. And the people in the room were extremely excited. At times, some of the delegates stood up for the entirety of not only Michelle Obama's speech, but also Barack Obama's speech.
Yeah, Shauna, and so people understand what you just described, the former First Lady taking a shot at that use of the word black jobs, which is a term former President Donald Trump has used in his rallies, in his speeches, at a debate with Joe Biden, where he talked about migrants taking quote-unquote black jobs. And, of course, everybody's like, well, what is a black job? I think Michelle Obama defined it very, very clearly. In case you didn't know, now you know, in making that joke at the former president's expense. The question I have for you, Shauna, is what do we know about day 3? Who's going to be speaking later tonight?
It's day 3. Folks are still energetic, even though we were all up pretty late last night. And what we are going to hear tonight is all about Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, whom Harris has tapped to be her running mate and vice presidential pick. Walz is going to present himself to the audience and introduce himself to those who do not know him. And someone that we all know very well, former President Bill Clinton, will also grace the stage tonight and give remarks.
Shauna, before I let you go, there's something that I don't think has been sort of highlighted enough, which is something that I thought was remarkable, and I want to get your sense in talking to delegates and talking to voters what they think about this, which is not only was the convention where you are in Chicago packed to capacity, Vice President Kamala Harris wasn't even there. She was in another state, and she packed that stadium in another state to the gills. It's exactly the same location where Republicans held their convention just a few weeks ago. Just talk to me about that.
There's been a little bit of a back and forth between the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign. You had J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, going to the same cities and states that Harris was going to be in just a couple weeks ago. And last night, you saw Vice President Kamala Harris pack out the forum in Milwaukee where the RNC was held. Both events were completely packed. In fact, when they showed the Milwaukee event up on the screen, I was like, wait, is that us? And so Harris actually circled around in Air Force Two when she came back to Chicago last night for about 10 minutes because she wanted to be able to see her husband give those remarks. She's back in Chicago now, and we will wait and see what happens tonight.
And Shauna, the other thing that was sort of striking is in that what is generally a ceremonial a moment at a convention where the states announce their delegates, who the delegates are throwing their votes in for, in this case, Kamala Harris. It was there was a stark contrast between how it happened at the RNC and how it happened in Chicago. Even, I think everybody is still talking about the moment when Georgia announced their delegates and Lil John came out. I mean, it just, you had a DJ Cassidy up there that was spinning songs that described or that were at least in reference to those states who were delivering votes for those delegates.
The DNC had Lil John and the RNC had Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan. But also at the DNC, we saw a lot of notable figures like Spike Lee, who was with the New York delegation when they made their announcement. We even saw Eva Longoria with the Texas delegation last night. So it's definitely been a star-studded event. But I will say that electricity in the room definitely started when Lil John walked down those stairs saying, "Turn down for what?"
It makes you almost forget that President Biden was relegated to after prime time the night before. All right, Shauna Mizell on the campaign trail for us in Chicago, covering day 3 of the DNC. We'll check in with you a little bit later, Shauna. Thanks so much. And, of course, CBS News will have full coverage of day 3 of the Democratic National Convention throughout the day, plus special programming that begins today at 5 p.m. Eastern. Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about the Trump campaign. Former President Donald Trump was in Michigan yesterday for a speech on crime and safety. He heads to North Carolina later for an address on national security. The event today will feature that new bulletproof glass that will surround the former president at outdoor events in the wake of that assassination on attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania last month. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland is in Asheboro, North Carolina, and joins me now. North Carolina, a key battleground state, Scott.
Oh, without question. And you can tell when you're here in North Carolina, Vlad, because you're just going to get marinated in this sea of campaign ads, as we've seen on pretty much every platform when you are moving through this state. The political climate is quite something right now. But let me tell you, for this first outdoor event since July 13th for Donald Trump, he could not have figured or pointed toward a better actual climate. It is just gorgeous up and down the East Coast today, and that includes here in Asheboro, about 90 minutes outside of Charlotte. The event happens 2 p.m. Eastern time outside of an aviation museum here. Noteworthy for a few reasons. It'll have likely that bulletproof glass you mentioned, which the Secret Service has approved for outside of his podiums and stages for outdoor events moving forward. But also, Vlad, because it'll be Trump and his running mate side by side here, the vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance will join him here. And often when you have the ticket together at an event, it's to amplify the impact, the political benefit of that event. And they have brought both principals here to North Carolina. I think that really underscores the growing stakes and the growing focus of the Tar Heel state.
Yeah, Scott, the other thing that I think everybody is curious about and will be watching today, and I know you will as well, is how the former president and how Senator Vance will respond to what we saw last night in Chicago from the Democrats. Everything from former First Lady Michelle Obama saying that former President Trump felt threatened by being in a room or being in the same space as highly educated, highly successful Black Americans, to former President Obama making a very pointed reference about crowd sizes. And we've seen the crowd sizes for Vice President Harris over the last couple of days, not just at the DNC, but also in Minneapolis. So I guess for his campaign, the Trump campaign, they've said to you and others that they want the former president to stay focused on the issues. That's where they feel they can have a real impact in a battleground state like North Carolina. But as you know, having spoken to the former president many times, it's really, really hard to get him to stay on track when he wants to hit back.
The campaign has billed this event as a military defense-focused event because it's in North Carolina, home of Camp Liberty and our Camp Lejeune and Fort Liberty. But it's the muscle memory of Donald Trump to counterpunch politically. It's hard to imagine he works his way through this event today without saying something about the blistering he took before a national audience from the stage in Chicago from the Obamas last night. And as is often the case with Trump, he tries to feed off the energy of whoever's in the crowd, and he will have his fans here today. This is an event that's open to the public, and Trump supporters with their Trump MAGA hats and shirts will be there, and it gives him an opportunity to leverage that crowd to fuel his political fire. It seems almost certain he says something about what the Obamas said about him last night.
All right, Scott McFarland breaking it down for us as he always does so well. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you. All right, let's talk about Ukraine, which has targeted Moscow in what Russian officials say is the largest drone attack on the city so far. Look at these images coming into the newsroom. Russia's defense ministry says its troops shot down all 45 drones overnight, including 11 over the Moscow region. Ukraine has not confirmed those attacks. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are continuing their incursion into the Kursk region of Russia. CBS News foreign correspondent Ian Lee is covering that from Ukraine this morning. Ian, good morning.
It's good to be with you. Overnight, Moscow experienced the largest drone attack since the fighting started in 2022. 45 in all, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. Moscow claims it shot all of them down, but what this underscores is the increased use of drones in warfare. Kyiv has been able to strike deep into Russia, targeting strategic sites, as well as use them effectively on the battlefield. I spoke with the commander yesterday who is taking part in the Kursk operation. He explained how they help his troops find and kill their enemy, as well as keep his men safe. He also talked about how this offensive changed the mood for his men, calling them upbeat, and he feels confident that they can still take more ground as well as conduct similar operations in the future. What surprised him was to find 18, 19-year-old conscripts guarding the border and not hardened professionals, and that's one of the reasons they've been so successful. He also praised the U.S.-led NATO training they've received, saying it's opened their eyes to a new way of fighting, which involves speed, aggression, and maneuvering. He talked about how the American mine-clearing vehicles played such a crucial role in the beginning of that incursion, clearing the way past the border, but he says what they need now is more armored personnel carriers, as well as counter-battery equipment to target Russia's long-range weapons. Something else he's starting to see is Russian soldiers who've been fighting in the eastern part of Ukraine being redeployed to the Kursk region. And that's important for Kyiv as Ukraine continues to lose ground on that front. What's interesting, though, is that the commander says that those battle-hardened soldiers don't know how to fight a war of speed and maneuver. So he says that they are more timid when it comes to confronting the Ukrainians. Vlad?
All right, Ian, thanks so much. Appreciate it. We're getting some breaking news into the newsroom right now about that recovery effort at the site of that sunken yacht off the coast of Italy. We're going to have all the details on what we're learning. Stick around. We'll be right back. We're following some breaking news. Divers just recovered 2 bodies off the coast of Sicily after they scoured the wreck of that luxury yacht that sank during a storm earlier this week. Rescue officials believe the 4 people who are still missing may be in the sailboat's hull, and specialist cave divers are working in shifts to search the submerged vessel. Of course, we'll bring you any more information as we learn it right here at CBS News 24/7. Okay, let's talk about weather. Stay hydrated and stay indoors, especially if you are in some part of the South today. There's a heat wave barreling down those states. Parts of Texas will see highs of 110 degrees. San Angelo and Abilene will see 109. Austin and San Antonio are expected to get as hot as 107 degrees. Whew, that is hot. CBS News correspondent Janet Shamlian is out there in the heat. She's joining us now from Houston. Janet, just describe, how does it feel?
Well, you know what, Vlad? Let's just say this. Houston in August is always miserable, but today is going to be something completely different. We're on Allen Parkway. It's a big running trail. This place is usually packed with runners right now. They are not out today. And while the temperature right now, just a couple of them, as you can see, running by us here looking hot, while the temperature is in the high 80s right now, that's really misleading because let's go in the sun for just a second. And I've got this, which will show us the temperature on the pavement, which is 104 degrees. A woman just came by with her dog and told me this is the only time of day that she could bring her dog out on the sidewalk. It is going to be the actual temperature here today, more than 100 degrees, 100 to 103. The feels like temperature, 110 to 115, which makes something like this, a neck fan, really a necessity or just a place to stay cool or to stay indoors today. Vlad, this is going to be the hottest week of the year in Houston, and that is saying something.
And so what are officials, Janet, telling you about what people should do to stay safe?
So, first of all, lots of water, hydration, the stuff that we always hear. And if you have a place to go with air conditioning, that you should go there. In addition, people can go to community centers, libraries, in order to stay cool. The museums are open, a lot of them offering free admission. Right now, the power grid here, ERCOT, is holding up. It's showing normal. So we're not at this hour on Wednesday, early morning, not in danger of having rolling blackouts or anything like that. But obviously, this is not temperatures to mess with. And a lot of people, frankly, even in Houston, even in Texas, don't have air conditioning.
All right, Janet Shamlian, here's hoping everybody stays safe and you as well. You're already looking a little flush out there. Get inside one of those places with an air conditioner. We appreciate you, Janet. You got your neck. Yeah, exactly. We'll talk to you later. Thanks so much. All right, for more on the weather, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. Grant.
Hey, Vlad, I'll tell you what, this is the time of year where you go to different parts of the country, and it's amazing how different conditions are just from temperatures. We were just looking at Texas. Texas this morning, waking up with temps in the middle and upper 80s. That's cruel when you look just up to the Northeast. Many places from the Midwestern states all the way into the Northeast waking up this morning with temperatures in the 50s and 60s. It's an early taste of fall to the north, but meanwhile, still the dead of summer to the south. Let me show you what we're looking at here across the southern plains into Texas today. Excessive heat warnings. We were just listening to how feels like temperatures are going to be approaching 110 degrees through a good portion of central and southeastern Texas. In fact, most of the state of Texas is working with some type of heat advisory. Look at some of these numbers. You've got temperatures in Houston, 100, feeling like 110 degrees. San Antonio, 108, feels like 110. Even as far north as Amarillo. Temperatures are going to be around 103 this afternoon. Tomorrow, no major difference, maybe a slight shift to the west, a little bit of relief in Houston tomorrow, but San Antonio still feeling like 111 degrees. It's crazy how they are currently feeling some of the hottest temperatures of the summer. Meanwhile, like I mentioned, that early taste of fall descending into a good portion of, I'll say, the northeastern part of the United States. So we are finding some showers up towards Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. But still very nice conditions back into the Midwestern states. Chicago at 75. Meanwhile, still watching warm and dry conditions as you get out toward the West Coast. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, thanks so much, man. We'll check in with you a bit later. Israel says the Lebanon-based Hezbollah militant group fired more than 50 rockets this morning, and some hit homes in the Golan Heights. CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio has more from Tel Aviv on the ongoing war in Gaza and a warning. This report contains images some may find disturbing.
Sliced by shrapnel in an Israeli strike, a child bled out on a market street. Another laid crumpled with her pink backpack. She moved her fingers, clinging to life. But at least 50 people died in the past 24 hours, with hundreds more killed in the past few days and topping 40,000 since October 7th this past weekend, says the Hamas-run health ministry. Netanyahu is committing genocide, said Mohana Shabbat. We are children, said Abdullah al-Khatib. I want to go home. In Israel, the remains of Noam Perry's father, 80-year-old Chaim Perry, abducted from Kibbutz Nir Oz, came home Tuesday.
It has kind of relief.
Along with the remains of 5 other hostages. Israel's military recovered them in a 30-foot deep tunnel shaft in Khan Yunis, behind a false wall.
Do you think Netanyahu did everything he could?
They're still dying there, so no one is doing enough. They can come back only if a deal will be made, and it should be made fast.
How can you make sure your father's death will not be in vain?
I think the only thing that would be important for my father is to save lives.
That hope still elusive as military firepower tests the fragility of all.
And those ceasefire talks are still elusive. Israel and Hamas blaming each other for trying to sabotage talks. Those are still set for Cairo starting tomorrow. Iran and Hezbollah have not publicly backed down from attacking Israel if those talks fail. Vlad.
Incredibly moving reporting. Ramy, thank you very much. A new report detailed missed opportunities to possibly stop the person responsible for the deadliest shooting in the state of Maine. What the report revealed is coming up. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. Another setback for Boeing. Plane manufacturer is grounding its fleet of 777-9 test planes after it found structural damage between the engine and the rest of the aircraft during maintenance checks. In a statement, Boeing said it had informed federal regulators and will resume flight testing when ready. The planes were designed for long flights and were scheduled for delivery in 2025 after years of delays. An independent commission issued a report saying there were missed opportunities to intervene and possibly prevent the 2 deadliest shootings in Maine's history. An Army reservist killed 18 people at a bowling alley and a bar in Lewiston before taking his own life last year. The commission said the Army Reserve failed to maintain proper psychiatric care for the gunman. It also said local law enforcement had the authority to seize his guns and put him in protective custody weeks before the shootings. The pilot and a passenger on board a small plane were killed in a fiery crash in West Texas. The private plane slammed into a mobile home park and other nearby buildings, sparking a massive fire and causing at least 2 explosions. Crews rescued an injured woman from a mobile home. Witnesses say the plane appeared to be struggling to gain altitude and clipped power lines after taking off from an airport in the city of Odessa. All right, turning back now to our top story, where day 3 of the Democratic National Convention will begin later today. Tonight, former President Bill Clinton and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will take to the stage before Governor Tim Walz officially accepts the vice presidential nomination. CBS News reporter Caroline Cummings joins me now with the very latest. So, Caroline, we expect to hear from some pretty big names in the Democratic Party following the Obamas last night, including, as I said, former President Bill Clinton and Nancy Pelosi. But it's going to be really, it was already hard for President Obama, and he indicated that, to follow Michelle Obama. I'm guessing former President Bill Clinton, who's no slouch in the speech-making department himself, is probably sweating just a little bit.
Right. That was really the showstopper last night for Democrats. Of course, the Obamas are the most popular, arguably some of the most popular Democrats in the party, and they really brought the house down in the room. People were overjoyed to hear them speak. But tonight, the headliner is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who will formally accept that vice presidential nomination. And he is going to try to introduce himself to Americans for the first time. A poll that just came out shows that 4 in 10 don't know much about him to form an opinion about his candidacy. So where I cover Minnesota politics in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so Minnesotans are quite familiar with him. He's, of course, in the middle of his second term, but this will be an opportunity for him to kind of define himself to Democrats here in the room who might not know much about him, or certainly any American who's looking on, Vlad.
Yeah, so Caroline, let me ask you that, given your experience covering the governor in the state of Minnesota, the things that are coming to light now, for example, his military record, his military service record, and some other issues, it feels to me that he's an incredibly popular governor in his state, and that the voters there would have already vetted some of these issues that he's facing on a national platform, or perhaps not. You tell me.
Well, Vlad, some of these issues have come up in previous campaigns, namely his military record and when he left the service after serving in the Guard for many years. He left before a deployment, and that has come under scrutiny by Senator J.D. Vance. But that was brought up as recently as his 2022 campaign. So some of these issues have been brought up before. And, of course, some of the things that Republicans are most critical of with the governor are his response to the 2020 civil unrest and riots following George Floyd's murder, and also COVID-19 and the handling of the pandemic. Of course, the governor stands by his record on COVID. He says he saved lives, the policies that they implemented, but that was a big point of contention for his reelection campaign in 2022. But ultimately, he won very easily in the state of Minnesota. So a lot of when you're talking about to a local reporter who's covered somebody for a few years, there are some things that kind of rise to the top of the national conversation that we have been keeping a close eye on for the last couple of years.
Although they have tried to hit the governor, the Republicans, on his response to the protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder, you have that audio tape of the former president, Donald Trump, praising Governor Walz and his response in the wake of that. So it's hard to it's sort of like pot, meat, kettle. Caroline, always great to have you. Thanks so much. Appreciate you. All right, let's talk about what the whole world is watching, and that is what some pro-Palestinian protesters were shouting during protests near the DNC yesterday. Dozens were arrested after clashing with police. Headed into day 3, security, of course, is still a top concern. And CBS News national correspondent Roxana Saberi is live in Chicago with the very latest on what we can expect today. So the question that a lot of people will have, Roxana, is how are protesters in some instances able to get beyond the barriers that police have enacted? And what are they doing this time around, day 3, to ensure that that doesn't happen again?
Good morning, Vlad. Well, yesterday what we saw was dozens of pro-Palestinian demonstrators holding an unauthorized march, and they gathered outside the Israeli consulate here in Chicago, which is about 2 miles east of here. We're standing in front of the United Center where delegates have been meeting. And many of these protesters had their faces covered. They were waving Palestinian flags and chanting "Free Palestine," but a large police presence blocked them from the building. And when some pro-Israeli protesters showed up, the police kept the two groups apart. The atmosphere, though, started to get tense when some pro-Palestinian protesters tried to move past the police to march. Some stopped traffic momentarily, and officers in riot gear walled them in. So we saw arrests of several people handcuffed on the ground, and we've since learned from police that around at least 70 people were arrested. So unlike the larger pro-Palestinian march that was held on Monday, like I just mentioned, the protest last night was unauthorized. The one on Monday was largely peaceful, other than when a small group of protesters broke away and got through the barricade here behind me. Police say they arrested around 13 people then. We are expecting another pro-Palestinian march held by the Coalition to March on the DNC tomorrow. Vlad?
All right, Roxanne, I know you'll be in the thick of it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your reporting as always. Let us turn now to the primary elections across the United States. Last night was a big night for Republicans in Florida. Avid Trump supporter Senator Rick Scott defeated his GOP challenger, and Representative Matt Gaetz easily defeated his Kevin McCarthy-backed opponent. Meanwhile, in the state of Alaska, Democratic incumbent Representative Mary Peltola advanced in the state's primary as she fights to keep that seat blue. Joining me now with the very latest from the Hill is CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killion. Nicole, you just heard me break down what happened in Florida. No surprise there, or was there somebody scratching their head as to the results of last night's primaries?
I mean, not really, but look, what is interesting, particularly about the primary involving Matt Gaetz and his challenger Aaron Dimmock, is that, this is the last of the so-called revenge tour, as he dubbed it, by former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. As you know, Gaetz led the ouster of the former speaker almost a year ago, and so consequently, we saw the former speaker support some of these challengers to GOP incumbents. And there have been a number of races throughout the summer, including Nancy Mace, Bob Good, Eli Crane, among others. But Matt Gaetz, of course, kind of caps things off. And so once again, we saw Matt Gaetz won pretty handily over Aaron Dimmock, despite millions of dollars being spent in this race by some McCarthy-aligned PACs. I spoke with Matt Gaetz last night, and, he feels to a certain extent vindicated, even though there's still a lot of bad blood there with the former speaker. But he said, he felt that the former speaker was motivated by revenge and pettiness and was trying to smear him, but is glad that in the end, voters in Northwest Florida chose otherwise. As far as Rick Scott, we now know, of course, with his victory last night, this solidifies the Senate race there in the Sunshine State, with the senator and former governor expected to face off against Debbie McCarcel-Powell, who will be his Democratic opponent.
And real quickly, Nicole, what's the latest with the elections in Alaska?
Well, what's interesting there is another incumbent, of course, Mary Peltola, did manage to advance. Alaska's a little different because they have ranked choice voting there. So really, it's a system of the top vote getters advancing. So she was one along with two Republican challengers. But she is facing an uphill battle as she tries to retain the seat for a second term. She did make history the first time around, becoming the first Alaska native to win this seat. But of course, being in a very deep red state and being a Democrat, she's got to toe a very challenging line to try to appeal to voters. So that is something that has kind of dogged her, not only in the primary, but could continue to be an issue this fall.
All right, Nicole Killion reporting from the Hill for us this morning. Thank you, Nicole.
Great. Thank you.
UPS workers plan on hitting the picket line today in Texas amid a scorching heat wave. Long hours in trucks with no air conditioning are just some of the poor conditions union leaders say their drivers are up against, and their demands come after a driver in Texas passed out at the wheel due to heat exhaustion. The union said he sought help from supervisors but was told to keep driving. CBS News Texas reporter Lacey Beasley is joining me now live to talk about this. That is where UPS workers are calling for action. So, Lacey, break down what the workers are demanding.
Hey, good morning, Vlad. Yeah, the biggest thing that these UPS protesters are wanting is AC in their trucks. I'm learning for the first time today that the majority of these trucks do not have air conditioning. I talked to one UPS driver just moments ago. He says they have fans in the trucks, though temperatures can reach up to 120 to 150 degrees. It's extremely hot conditions, and as you guys have been saying, Texas summers are extremely hot. We're in McKinney, just north of Dallas. We've been monitoring heat conditions all week and really this whole summer. So air conditioning, that is number one on their priority list.
So, Lacey, we know that a driver passed out. I just mentioned that at the top. That driver was driving when he passed out. That's according to Teamster Local 767. Just describe what happened there. And, the reports are that a supervisor told him to essentially walk it off and keep driving.
Essentially, Vlad, yeah, that's what we're learning from the union here. Now, they're telling us this UPS driver, he was already feeling nauseous. He was vomiting even from heat-related illness. He reached out to a manager and, notified him, hey, I'm not feeling well. That manager still told him to drive the truck from McKinney to Longview, which if you're not local to the area, that's about a 2-hour drive. So the UPS driver continued driving, and that's when we had cell phone video showing him veering off the road, nearly hitting oncoming traffic. He was hitting trees, and that's when 911 was called eventually later. But yeah, it's a very unfortunate event, and honestly thankful that there weren't more severe injuries after that. That happened on Friday. So yeah, this UPS driver still behind the wheel, passed out behind the wheel, and supervisors they told him to keep going, and he did, and he passed out behind the wheel.
All right, CBS News Texas reporter Lacey Beasley reporting for us from McKinney, Texas. Lacey, thank you very much. Freight trains in Canada may be not on the rails tomorrow amid a potential labor strike, and many U.S. companies are bracing for supply chain repercussions, what both sides are demanding and the impact the stoppage could have. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, abortion is on the ballot in November for both Arizona and Montana voters. The question will stay on the ballot after Arizona's Supreme Court ruling yesterday, and Montana certified the constitutional initiative clearing the way for voters to weigh in. The rule in both states would decide if abortions would be allowed until the fetus is viable, which is typically around the 24-week mark. Abortion will be a ballot item for several other states this election season. Of course, this comes all in the wake of the reversal of Roe v. Wade back in 2022. Meanwhile, a switch to electric and hydrogen big rig trucks in California may be a push towards a greener environment. But CBS Sacramento's Brady Halib spoke to some fire officials who say the new law may ignite other issues on the road.
Starting next year, all new big rig trucks must be electric or hydrogen powered. But the truckers that I spoke to say that California isn't ready for that. Meanwhile, firefighters say they pose a major risk in the case of a crash.
I think that's not going to work, I think so.
Sacramento truck driver Jaswinder Singh has his doubts about the transition over to EV big rigs.
Right now, they have no any space, they're going to charge.
While California leads the nation in electric truck stops, Singh fears there won't be enough by next year and worries about his future EV truck breaking down.
We can find a mechanic for the diesel trucks everywhere, or something you can fix yourself. And for electronic, you don't know. If something happens, you're going to stuck there for maybe 2 days, 1 day, or maybe more.
Limited charging infrastructure and the cost of new electric trucks are the logistical worries, but crashes are another.
This was the first real incident we ran involving that EV type vehicle.
On Monday, a Tesla semi-truck ran off the road in the Sierra and caught fire, forcing crews to shut down the highway for more than 12 hours. Incidents like this are catching the attention of Republican lawmakers, calling on the governor to delay. Writing in a letter, this incident not only interrupts people's travel and commerce, but could have endangered lives and livelihoods.
We are basically at the forefront of this new challenge.
Fires involving electric vehicles also pose a greater risk to firefighters. Once the batteries ignite, no amount of water can extinguish it, forcing crews to let it burn out.
The toxic fumes coming off of that are much, much worse than your typical commercial vehicle.
It's that toxic smoke that forced CAL FIRE to shut down the highway. And as more vehicles become electric, it raises the question, how will crews keep up with more EV crashes?
We do need to develop better, more efficient ways of extinguishing these fires.
Okay, Benefer 2.0. Benefer 2.0. Come on, I just came up with that on my own right here in the studio in real time. It's called an ad lib. And the question is it over for real? What we know about J-Lo and Ben Affleck's divorce. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Getting some breaking news into the newsroom. Authorities in Iran have confirmed the cause of the helicopter crash that killed Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi earlier this year. Officials have determined whether and the aircraft's inability to carry the weight it was holding caused that deadly crash. Raisi served as president from 2021 until his death. Now to this, shipments to the United States are on the line right now as Canada is on the brink of a potentially major rail strike if two unions do not reach a labor deal by tomorrow. Barring a last-minute deal, the country's two largest rail companies plan to lock out a total of almost 10,000 workers on Thursday. National political reporter of Global News, Mackenzie Gray, is live joining us now from Canada. And to break this all down, explain to our viewers here in the United States what the labor unions are demanding, Mackenzie, and just how many workers will this impact?
Well, the key issues right now are not about wages, which is generally what we see as big issues here in strikes in Canada. The key issues are about scheduling right now. We're seeing the labor unions, the Teamsters, about 10,000 that are represented by both the two big railways in here, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific, Kansas City. They are arguing over scheduling issues as well as safety concerns they have. In CN's case, too, the union is saying they will be forcing people to relocate to different parts of Canada to deal with labor shortages. They are very far apart right now, and it looks like at 12:01 tomorrow there will be a strike, the first time in Canadian history that both major railways will not be running.
Mackenzie, demanding schedules and the lack of paid sick time nearly brought rail companies here in the United States to a standstill 2 years ago, and then President Biden had to step in. How likely is it that President Trudeau tries to force a deal through?
Well, at this point, it doesn't seem very likely. We've heard from the Labour Minister who's in charge of these negotiations. They at no point have threatened either recalling Parliament to legislate them back to work or use powers that he has to force the two sides to binding arbitration. So they are hoping to get a deal at the table. But as of now, both the union, the companies, and the federal government have all said the sides are not close on these key issues. Of course, there could be a last-second deal that solves these problems, but it's unlikely. And there is a big impact here, of course, in Canada, $1 billion a day in goods moves along the railways, but also with the U.S. Supply chains are very tight between Canada and the U.S., and in particular, agricultural goods mainly move by rail. Many Midwestern states move their agricultural goods through Canada to get to U.S. and Canadian ports. That would be shut down if a strike goes ahead as of tomorrow.
All right, Mackenzie Gray reporting from Ottawa for us this morning. Thank you, Mackenzie. All right, let's get to the news everybody's talking about. The on-again, off-again couple is off again. Of course, I'm talking about Hollywood starlet Jennifer Lopez, who was filed for divorce from Ben Affleck after 2 years of marriage. The couple rekindled their relationship after they got engaged way back in 2003. Go back and look at some of those old videos from J-Lo back in the day. They then split up due to pressures of the public eye. Look, I know we're having a little bit of lighthearted fun, but as a child of divorce, I can't stand to see two people not be able to make it work. So I wish them both the very best. I want love for everybody. Maybe they'll find it the next time around. All right, let's bring in the CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the final look at the national forecast. Don't you just love, Grant? You love love.
Oh, you just want it to work out, you know?
You do.
Whether it's a celebrity couple or not, you just want it to work out. Yeah, you hate to see people going their separate ways. Hey, speaking of going our separate ways, I think a lot of the country are saying goodbye to summer. Meanwhile, Texas still hanging on for dear life. Dangerous heat across a lot of Texas today. Places like San Angelo reaching 110, breaking records. Several places, in fact, close to 16 records expected to be broken across Texas today. Meanwhile, there's fall, and in fact, maybe a preview of fall across the Midwestern states into the Northeast. Meanwhile, rain continues way up towards Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and still looking at nice, dry, warm weather out on the West Coast. Vlad, back over to you. Have a great day.
All right, Grant. Thank you, man. See you tomorrow. An encore of CBS Mornings is coming up next. Stick around.